In this episode of Trekking Through Compliance, we take up the episode, The Empath.
Compliance, the final frontier. Tom Fox is the voyager of Trekking Through Compliance. His mission? To explore the original series and seek out and share what it can teach you about compliance. Here's your host, Tom Fox.
Trekking Through Compliance, Episode 67, The Empath. In this episode of Trekking Through Compliance, we consider the episode The Empath, which aired on December 6th, 1968, and occurred on Stardate 5121.0. Story synopsis. When the Enterprise stops to pick up a scientific staff, Linky and Ozaba, from the planet Minara II, which is in orbit around a star about to go supernova, Kirk, Bones, and Spock discover the station has been abandoned for 3 months. Meanwhile, Scott reports a massive solar flare measuring 3.5 on the Ritter scale, not Richter. Kirk informs Scott to move the Enterprise to a safe distance until the flare passes, putting it out of communication range for 74.1 solar hours. The landing party reviews the tapes to see what has become of the scientific staff. In the tape, a high-pitched whine begins, and Linky and Ozaba are whisked away one at a time while attempting to cover their ears. After reviewing the tape, Kirk and company are subjected to the same high-pitched whine and are transported underground to the chambers of the Vians, 121.32 meters below the surface. Here they discovered a timid, mute woman. Kirk starts to approach, or rather McCoy starts to approach, but Kirk holds him back. When McCoy protests that she seems harmless enough, Spock reminds him that the sand bats of Minara II appear to be inanimate rock crystals, Doctor, before they attack. Kirk wonders how he will communicate with the woman unless she is a telepath. However, Spock notes that it's unlikely, since 98% of all known telepathic species send as well as receive thoughts. McCoy dubs the woman Gem. Jem. While Kirk is trying to question Gem, 2 Vians appear. When Kirk tries to secure freedom for the landing party, the Vians trap McCoy, Spock, and Kirk in a force field which draws energy from their bodies. The Vians then vanish, releasing the landing party. Gem then touches Kirk's forehead after he has been injured and transfers the wound to her own head and heals it, revealing herself to be an empath. Spock reports that his tricorder now reveals a collection of machinery which did not appear there before. When they go to investigate, they discover Linky and Ozaba encased in plastic cylinders. In addition, there are 3 empty cylinders labeled Subject McCoy, Subject Kirk, and Subject Spock. Each of the Vians then reappears, or one of the Vians then reappears, rather, and Kirk distracts him while Spock nerve pinches him. However, the Vian is only pretending to have fainted, and the landing party does exactly what the Vians intended when they head up to the planet's surface. On the surface, the Vians create an illusion that Scotty is on the surface with a search party. This distracts Kirk and McCoy while the Vians study Kirk and offer to let him go if Kirk offers himself as a specimen. The Vians then torture Kirk without apparent reason. They let him go, but Kirk finds that McCoy and Spock are subterranean prisoners. Jim cures Kirk's injuries but faints from the strain. Although Kirk does not yet realize it turns out the Vians are testing the empath Jim to see if she will sacrifice herself by saving members of the Enterprise crew. The Vians have the ability to save the inhabitants of only one out of several planets doomed to destruction, and wish to see if Jim's planet is worth saving. The Vians require another test and give Kirk the choice of selecting McCoy, who will likely be killed, or Spock, who will likely suffer permanent brain damage. While Bones is bemoaning being trapped underground, he reports, "I'm a doctor, not a coal miner." Pretty basic insight there, Bones. Bones tranquilizes Kirk to give him rest, but Spock points out that he is now in command and will select himself for the torture. McCoy then sneaks up on Spock and tranquilizes him as well, leaving only himself when the Vians come for a volunteer. When Spock awakens, he adjusts a control device he has obtained from one of the Vians to operate using his own brainwaves and transport Kirk and himself, including Jim, to the torture chamber. They find McCoy is tied up and nearly dead with almost no pulse, significant internal injuries, bleeding in the chest and abdomen, hemorrhaging in the spleen and liver, and 70% kidney failure. Gem attempts to save McCoy but stops before she kills herself in the process. She tries again, but McCoy pushes her away. The Vians appear and watch the spectacle, locking Spock and Kirk inside force fields. Kirk secures their freedom and a promise to save Gem's planet when he convinces the Vian that Gem has already earned her planet's survival. So what's the fun fact? Well, I found one of the most interesting interpretations about this episode was on the mission log site, which of course I'm citing in the show notes, where a commentator, Gorm Nykrime, wrote, "The Vians are misunderstood Christ figures who never took credit for giving their lives to save another. No greater love than this. In the end, they were the true empaths who couldn't live if they knew they survived at the cost of Gem's people." Very interesting interpretation. What are some of the continuity issues we see in this episode? Though identified as Thon and Lai in the closing credits, the two Vians are never called by their proper names on screen. In a later episode entitled Turnabout Intruder, Kirk, who is in the body of Janice Lester, mentions the events of this episode to try and convince Spock of the mind switch which has occurred. The sound effects of the Vian's laboratory were previously used in the android Norman's lab in iMud. The footage of the sun Minara is used from the episode Operation Annihilate. And the planet Minara II appears in red in some orbital shots and gold in others. Neither Uhura or Ensign Chekhov appear in this episode. And most interestingly, this was DeForest Kelley's personal favorite episode. He does play a significant role in this, and I think the philosophy of this episode really ties into that of a physician of do no harm. So, interesting episode. I really like the starkness of the scenes in this, particularly the backgrounds. It's very different than many of the other more colorful episodes. I know you'll enjoy this episode, so check it out. This episode of Star Trek The Original Series is different in many ways, so I thought I might use it as a way to look at something we haven't looked at in this podcast series, which is cultural humility and how that plays a role as for you as a compliance professional. So, what are some of the key lessons from this episode? Well, let's start with some culture issues. Number one, paternalistic attitudes toward alien culture. The Federation representatives in the episode exhibited a somewhat paternalistic and condescending attitude towards the alien civilization they were observing. This type of cultural superiority complex can be a significant barrier to effective cross-cultural understanding and compliance, i.e., don't be the ugly American. 2, lack of true cultural exchange and immersion. The Federation team largely remained detached observers of the alien culture rather than actively engaging in a meaningful cultural exchange. Effective compliance often requires a deeper level of cultural immersion and learning, mutual learning. 3, disregard for local customs and practices. The Federation's actions, such as removing an injured crew member from the planet, demonstrate a lack of respect for the local customs and practices of the alien civilization. Compliance efforts must be grounded in a nuanced understanding and consideration of cultural norms. So what are some of the cultural humility lessons? Well, it starts with, of course, the importance of cultural humility. The episode highlights the need for cultural humility when investigators and compliance professionals approach unfamiliar cultures with openness, empathy, and a willingness to learn rather than assuming superiority. 2, the necessity of cultural immersion and exchange. Effective compliance requires going beyond superficial observation and actively engaging in a two-way culture exchange where both parties share knowledge and perspectives. 3, prioritizing local context and practices. Compliance efforts should be tailored to the specific cultural context, honoring local customs and practices and decision-making processes rather than imposing external standards. 4, fostering trust and collaboration. The lack of trust and collaboration between the Federation team and alien civilizations hindered their ability to effectively address the compliance challenges. Building trust and cooperative relationships is crucial for navigating complex cross-cultural compliance issues. 5, recognizing the limitations of an outsider's perspective. The Federation's team limited understanding of the alien culture and values ultimately led to their inability to fully comprehend the situation. Compliance professionals must remain cognizant of the inherent limitations of an outsider's perspective and continuously work to expand their cultural knowledge. By applying these culture-focused lessons from the Empath, compliance professionals can enhance their understanding of the critical role that cultural dynamics play in shaping effective compliance programs, strategies, and investigations. Join us tomorrow for Trekking Through Compliance, where we look at Elon of Troyes.
If you enjoyed this episode of Trekking Through Compliance, you can help it grow by sharing it with the biggest Trek fan you know.
This podcast is a part of the C-Suite Radio Network. For more top business podcasts, visit c-suiteradio.com.